Hi, I'm Sylvia Gurinsky. Very happy to be here to present Tropical Wanderings. This is a local history of South Florida's Jewish community. And the history of human history in South Florida goes back more than 12,000 years. Of explorers coming from Europe goes back to 1513. Juan Ponce de Leon coming from Spain to Florida. It's still being traced exactly where he landed in Florida, and it's also being traced whether he had crypto Jews with him. Again, this was during the Inquisition period. This is when Jews could not practice Judaism openly in Spain. And they're still trying to find out who might have been on his mission, who was Jewish. And in fact, the first open practice of Judaism in Florida dates back to 1763 when the British had control of Florida. By the 1800s, Moses Elias Levy had come to Florida. He was born in Morocco from a family that had been kicked out of Spain during the Inquisition of the family name Abenyule. And he made his way west across the Atlantic, got to Florida, North Florida, and tried to establish a community called Pilgrimage Plantation, kind of a kibbutz for Florida during the 18th century. And one of the interesting things about it is that he abolished slavery on the grounds of that pilgrimage plantation. But he had trouble recruiting people to come to Florida, a lot of challenges in living on the peninsula then, particularly animals, particularly mosquitoes. And he also started Pilgrimage Plantation in the 1830s, and this was around the time of the Second Seminole War in Florida, between the Seminole natives and U.S. troops. And during the conflict, a lot of the buildings of Pilgrimage Plantation burned to the ground. So Levy was not successful with his efforts. Now, he had a family, and he sent his oldest son to Virginia to study and eventually to learn about becoming a lawyer. And Moses Elias Levy favored the abolition of slavery, but his son, David Levy, did not, was a supporter of slavery. David Levy was involved as a territorial representative in helping Florida achieve statehood in 1845. And when that happened, he became Florida's first senator, also Florida's first Jewish senator. And he took on the family name in a tribute to the family heritage, Yulee. He served as senator until the start of the Civil War when Florida seceded from the Union. And today, Florida has Levy County and the town of Yulee, and also a state park about an hour north of Tampa that is part of the sugar mill heritage that his family had. Now, the first Jewish community in South Florida started in Key West around the 1880s. A lot of people who were coming from all sorts of different places, particularly Romania. They fell in love. Key West was an island at the time, no bridges or anything like that yet. And they called it the Medinat Yisrael of Florida. And the first congregation was originally known as Rodef Shalom. It started soon after the community started coming together. Eventually, a man named Morris Zion gave money to the synagogue. The name was changed to B'nai Zion, which it remains today. B'nai Zion remains a congregation in Key West today. By the 1890s, Henry Flagler was building his railroad through the eastern part of the state. By 1894, it got to the West Palm Beach area, and there were a number of merchants who were coming in, including Jewish merchants. This was one of them, Joseph Mendel. And Joseph Mendel established himself one of the founding fathers of the Jewish community of West Palm Beach. And eventually, he became West Palm Beach's first Jewish mayor in the 1920s. His name is still remembered today in the West Palm Beach area. A couple of years after the railroad came to West Palm Beach, it came to Miami. So in 1896, And there was, when Miami was incorporated as a city in July of 1896, there was a sizable Jewish population, something like 20 merchants. And there were enough merchants and their families so that that September they could celebrate Rosh Hashanah, commemorate Yom Kippur too. But then tragedies started to happen. Early on the morning of December 25th, Christmas Day in 1896, there was a fire that destroyed much of the town. A lot of the wood frame buildings were destroyed. One of the merchants was a Jewish merchant, Julius Frank, who died trying to retrieve his merchandise. After that fire, there was a yellow fever epidemic 2 years later. Many of those merchants left Miami. One who stayed with, though, was Isidore Cohen, who had gradually made his way down the southeast coast of Florida. He had been born in Russia, and had moved as a young man to the United States. And he came to Miami in early 1896, established his shop eventually in the area of what we know today as Flagler Street and Miami Avenue. And he started to chronicle the history of the community. In the 1920s, he published a book called Historical Sidelights and Sketches of Miami, Florida, really seen as one of the great sources of early Miami life, including the Jewish community. He married the widow of another local merchant, Ida Schneiderman, and they started a family. Isidore and Ida Cohen, among the founders of places such as Mount Sinai Hospital, Miami Jewish Home for the Aged. Their daughter, Claire Cohen Weintraub, was one of the founders of the Science Museum that today is the Frost Science Museum. He died, by the time he died in 1951, he'd seen a major transition in the Jewish community. Here's a look at Miami in the 1910s. 12th Street is today's Flagler Street. You see there Burdines. And there were enough Jews. There were about 50 Jews by then in Miami, enough for the community to establish finally a congregation. Originally, B'nai Zion, the same Morris Zion who had started Key West's congregation, also contributed to this one. And then another merchant, David Aframo, contributed $5,000, and the name was changed to Beth David Congregation. So it is the oldest congregation in the Miami area. Here's a picture of its first synagogue, which was located on the edge of today's downtown Miami. Beth David, the current location that they're in, they moved to in 1949. Now, merchants continued to come. By the 1910s, there was a family named Green that established a store in the Lake Worth area first, eventually West Palm Beach, called Pioneer Hardware. And they changed the name eventually. They changed the merchandise to Pioneer Linens, which still exists today. In Broward County was established in 1915, and a number of merchants, a lot of them coming from the Miami area, going north actually. One of the families was the Sokolos, who moved to Dania. Dania, the oldest community in today's Broward. Also, the Brown family as well. And Max Lerman, who also moved from the Miami area and who married another of the Miami pioneers, Rose Seitland, from another family, and also started establishing a shopping in Fort Lauderdale. So the Jewish community getting going in Broward County in the 1910s. Palm Beach County, the first congregations would be established in the 1920s. First Temple Israel, and then Bethel. Now, with more Jews coming to the area, that included a rise in anti Semitism. The Ku Klux Klan had major powers in Miami during that time period. They would do such things as twist tourism campaigns. The slanders that said it's always Jewish in Miami evolved from a tourism phrase, it's always June in Miami, which was meant for the wintry communities to the north. And the Jewish community started to counter groups such as the Ku Klux Klan and other anti Semitism by organizing. The National Council of Jewish Women Greater Miami section is the oldest of the civic organizations in South Florida for the Jewish community, and they were established in 1918. They continue their work today. Now, across Biscayne Bay from the city of Miami, there were new frontiers. A man named John Collins, the bearded man here, and his son in law Thomas Pancos bought about 2/3 of a barrier island. They started farming there. Collins wanted to build a bridge, and he got financing from this man, Carl Fisher. Fisher, the inventor of the Presto Light Auto headlamp from Indianapolis, also a builder of the Brickyard, where the Indianapolis 500 Speedway, the race takes place each year. And Fisher got land too, but they both restricted who could live on that land, who could build on that land. No Jews, no blacks. But meanwhile, there were two brothers who were in Miami, J.E. and J.N. Lummis, James and John Lummis, and they had done business with members of the Jewish community before. They had no objections to it. They purchased land south of Fifth Street, so that the first Jewish community was said to have started south of Fifth Street. And among the south of Fifth pioneers was a couple coming from New York, originally from Hungary, Joe and Jenny Weiss. And they came from New York because Joe Weiss had asthma. Doctor recommended climate such as the one in South Florida. They began a restaurant, a cafe called the Sunshine Inn at what was called a bathing casino, a large swimming pool in Miami Beach. And finally went independent. They went to what was called Biscayne Street. Today it's South Point Drive in Miami Beach. Joe's restaurant served seafood fish sandwiches, and they had Jenny's key lime pie, which, by the way, remains today. And there was a tourist attraction down the street from Joe's restaurant that was an aquarium. And one day, Joe Weiss was having a conversation with a ichthyologist, a scientist at the aquarium. The subject was stone crabs. And Joe Weiss started to experiment with stone crabs, with a way to cook stone crabs. And of course, ironically, the oldest Jewish family in Miami Beach began a restaurant with perhaps the most trafe delicacy on the menu, stone crabs. It was their son, Jesse Weiss, who would change the name to Joe's Stone Crab.